She was the hospital's ghost, a phantom in pale blue scrubs. A rookie nurse with a past buried deeper than the base's command bunker. He was the chief surgeon, a man whose arrogance was a shield for his corruption. When the guns started firing, the shield shattered, and the ghost came out of the shadows. Now, let me take you inside the wire, to a place where the only thing more dangerous than the enemy was the man in charge. The air in the field hospital at FOB Griffin was a thick cocktail of competing desperations. It smelled of bleach, trying and failing to conquer the metallic tang of blood. It carried the low, constant hum of overworked generators and the high, whining anxiety of a patient monitor that never seemed to shut up. For Nurse Anya Sharma, it was the smell of Tuesday. It was the smell of every day. She moved through the organized chaos with an economy of motion that some mistook for timidity. Her steps were soft on the scuffed linoleum, her hands sure and swift as she checked an IV drip, adjusted a bandage, or recorded vitals on a chart. She was small, unassuming, with dark hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun that did nothing to soften the sharp angles of her face. Her eyes were the color of a stormy sea, and they missed nothing. They saw the subtle tremor in a soldier's hand as he claimed he was fine, the faint cyanotic tinge to a patient's nail beds that signaled poor oxygenation long before the pulse oximeter screamed about it. They saw the way dust motes danced in the shafts of light cutting through the grimy windows, each one a tiny world of its own, oblivious to the life and death dramas playing out below. The soldiers she treated saw a quiet, competent nurse. They saw a gentle touch and a calm voice that could soothe the jagged edges of their pain and fear. They saw her as one of the angels of the wire, a soft place in a hard world. Dr. Alistair Finch saw a nuisance. "Nurse Sharma!" he boomed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls of the main trauma bay. He stood, hands on his hips, his expensive tailored scrubs somehow immaculate despite the grit and gore that coated everyone else. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulder, with a mane of silver hair that he probably thought made him look distinguished. It made him look like a predator. "What is the meaning of this?" Anya turned from the supply cabinet she had been meticulously organizing. She had spent the last hour during a rare lull, sorting surgical implements by size and function, labeling bins with a crisp, clear script. It was a chaotic mess before, a jumble of hemostats, scalpels, and forceps that cost precious seconds during an emergency. "Doctor?" she asked, her voice even, betraying no emotion. He gestured impatiently at the neat rows of sterile packs. All of this obsessive tidying. Do you have any idea how much time you've wasted on this little project? We are a trauma hospital, not a lending library. Things are needed now, not filed away for posterity." "It will be faster in a crisis, sir," Anya stated, not as a defense, but as a fact. "Everything has a place. No one will have to search for a number 10 blade or a Kelly clamp. It saves time. It saves lives." Finch's smile was a predatory slash. It was a smile that did not touch his cold blue eyes. He enjoyed this, the public correction, the assertion of his dominance. He stepped closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial growl that was meant for her, but was loud enough for the two medics nearby to hear. "Your job is to follow orders, nurse, not to re-engineer my hospital. You are here to pass me instruments, not to critique my systems. Is that understood?" Anya looked from his face to the cabinet. She saw the logic of her system, the clear, undeniable efficiency. He saw a challenge to his authority. She knew this dance. She had seen men like him before, men whose egos were as fragile as a bird's egg and just as easily shattered. "Yes, doctor," she said. The words tasted like ash. He gave a satisfied grunt and swept away, his entourage of sycophantic junior surgeons trailing in his wake like pilot fish on a shark. One of the medics, a young corporal named Miller, caught her eye and gave her a sympathetic grimace. She offered nothing in return. Sympathy was a vulnerability. It was a connection, and connections were dangerous. She preferred to remain a ghost. Later that day, the illusion of a lull was shattered by the percussive whump 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 of inbound Blackhawks. The call came over the radio. "Medevac inbound, 2 critical, 3 urgent, IED strike on a patrol." The trauma bay exploded into controlled motion. Nurses and medics prepped beds, checked equipment, and pulled on fresh gloves. Anya was already there, a silent shadow anticipating needs. She laid out transfusion kits, primed chest tube trays, and checked the suction. Her movements were a blur of efficiency. Dr. Finch strode in like a conquering hero, shouting orders that were mostly redundant. The team was good. They knew their jobs. He just needed to be the loudest voice in the room. The first gurney clattered through the doors bearing a young Marine, his face a mask of dust and blood, his leg a mangled ruin. Finch was on him instantly, barking assessments. Anya was on the soldier's other side, her fingers already on his carotid artery, her eyes scanning his face, his chest, his uninjured limbs. Massive hemorrhage from the femoral artery. Get me 4 units of O-neg and push 2 of plasma, now, Finch roared. His breathing is shallow, sir, Anya said, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. Tracheal deviation to the left. I think he has a tension pneumothorax. Finch didn't even look at her. He was the star of this show. He has a leg blown off, nurse. Of course his breathing is shallow. He's in shock. Focus on the bleeding. Clamp. I need a clamp. Anya's eyes narrowed. The soldier's jugular vein was distended, a clear textbook sign. The deviation was subtle, but it was there. Without immediate intervention, he would die from the pressure crushing his hardened lungs long before he bled out. Finch was focused on the spectacular cinematic injury. He was missing the quiet, faster killer. This was the line. She could obey, let the man die, and be safe in her anonymity. Or she could act. She didn't hesitate. While Finch was bellowing for more lap pads, Anya grabbed a 14-gauge needle and an alcohol swab from the cart. In one fluid motion, she swabbed the soldier's chest at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. "What in God's name are you doing?" Finch shrieked, finally noticing her. She ignored him. Her hand was steady. She found her mark and thrust the needle in. There was a soft pop as it punctured the pleura, followed by a loud, satisfying hiss of escaping air. The soldier's chest, which had been unnaturally still on that side, immediately began to rise and fall more evenly. The frantic beeping of the monitor slowed to a more stable rhythm. The entire bay went quiet for a fraction of a second. The medics stared. Even Finch was momentarily stunned into silence. Anya pulled the needle, secured the catheter, and looked directly at him. "He had a tension pneumothorax, doctor. Now you can focus on the bleeding." The rage that filled Finch's face was almost purple. It was apoplectic. He had been usurped, shown up by a rookie nurse in his own theater. His authority had been publicly and undeniably subverted. He pointed a trembling, blood-flecked finger at her. "You are finished," he hissed, his voice low and shaking with fury. "When this is over, you will be on the next transport plane out of this country, and you will be lucky if you ever work as a janitor in a clinic again. Get out of my trauma bay, now." Anya looked at the patient, now stable enough to survive the next 10 minutes. Then she looked at Finch. She gave a single, sharp nod, stripped off her bloody gloves, and walked out without a word. She didn't look back. The ghost retreated, leaving the God King to his kingdom of noise and ego. She walked down the quiet corridor, her footsteps the only sound, and felt the familiar cold weight of isolation settle back over her. It was an old friend. She found refuge in the sterile processing department, the hospital's steamy, clanking heart. Here, instruments were washed, sterilized, and repackaged. It was methodical, precise work. It was honest. She took over for a tired technician, her hands moving with practiced grace as she scrubbed bone fragments and tissue from a set of retractors. The rhythmic work calmed her. It was a process. A leads to B leads to C. There were rules. There was order. Unlike the chaos of the trauma bay, where the biggest variable was the man in charge, she knew he would make good on his threat. A man like Finch could not let such a slight go unanswered. His pride demanded a sacrifice, and she was the designated offering. She had a few hours, maybe a day, before the paperwork was filed and she was officially exiled. It didn't matter. She had survived worse than Alistair Finch. She had survived men who killed with far more than just paperwork and threats. Her past was a country she no longer visited, a place of shadows and whispered call signs, of the scent of cordite and the taste of adrenaline. She had been someone else then, someone harder, faster, more lethal. She had traded that life for this one, for the quiet satisfaction of healing instead of hurting. She had thought she could just disappear, become another face in the crowd. But the core of who you were, the training ground into your very bones, never truly left. It just slept. A low rumble vibrated through the floor, growing steadily into the familiar sound of an approaching convoy. It was followed by the higher-pitched whine of helicopter turbines. This was different from the usual medevacs. It sounded bigger, more important. The whole base seemed to tense, a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure. Corporal Miller poked his head into the sterilization room. His young face was flushed with excitement. "You hear? General Thorne is here. 4-star, landed 5 minutes ago. Rumor is they brought someone with them, a real HVP. A high-value person. It could be a captured enemy commander, a rescued hostage, a political asset. Whatever the case, it meant trouble." It painted a target on the entire base. Anya finished packing a set of surgical instruments, her movements never faltering. "General Marcus Thorne," she said, more to herself than to Miller. The name was a stone dropped into the placid pool of her memory, sending ripples out to a distant shore. She had never met him, but she knew the name. Everyone in her former life knew the name. He was a legend in the special operations community, a thinker's soldier, a man who saw the whole board, not just the next move. "Yeah, that's him," Miller said, oblivious. "Whole place is on lockdown. Guess Finch is putting on his best face for the big brass." He grimaced. "Probably take credit for that needle decompression you did." Anya sealed the sterile pack and placed it on the rack. "Let him," she said softly. Credit was a currency she had no use for. An hour later, the target on FOB Griffin was painted in strokes of fire and thunder. It didn't start with a whistle and a crump like a random mortar attack. It started with a series of sharp, coordinated cracks. The sound of high-velocity rounds hitting the perimeter guard towers. It was followed by the deep, guttural roar of a breaching charge at the main gate. The lights in the hospital flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the windowless corridor into absolute blackness. The generators, the hospital's lifeblood, had been targeted first. The emergency lights, powered by batteries, flickered on a second later, casting long, dancing shadows down the halls. Their eerie, greenish glow was punctuated by the sound of screaming. This wasn't an insurgency attack. This was an invasion. It was professional, precise, and brutally fast. Anya was in a small storage closet, restocking saline bags when the world ended. The concussive force of a nearby explosion rattled the shelves. Glass vials chattered against each other. For a half-second, she was frozen, not by fear, but by a flood of pure, unadulterated memory. The smell of dust and explosives, the sudden darkness, the screams. It was a language she understood perfectly. The nurse vanished. The operator took her place. Her mind became a cold, clear machine of threat assessment and tactical calculation. She didn't think. She processed. Attackers, professional, coordinated. Objective, likely the HVP. Location of HVP. Likely the main surgical suite or ICU, the most secure areas. My location, storage closet, rear corridor. Assets, medical supplies, my knowledge of the layout. Threat, multiple hostiles, armed, moving with purpose. She cracked the door to the closet and peered out. The hallway was chaos. Staff in scrubs were running, screaming, or cowering behind overturned gurneys. At the far end of the hall, she saw them. 3 figures clad in black tactical gear, moving in a tight, fluid stack. They moved like wolves, their carbines held at a low ready, sweeping their sectors. They ignored the panicking staff. They were not here for collateral damage. They were here for a specific prize. Anya let the door close silently. Her heart was a cold, steady drum against her ribs. It was not the frantic beat of fear. It was the heavy, rhythmic beat of purpose. She had a choice. She could hide. She could wait for it to be over, for the base QRF to respond and retake the hospital. Or she could act. She could be the ghost she was always meant to be. She looked around the closet. Saline bags, bandages, syringes, and on a high shelf, a box of large-bore intraosseous needles designed to be drilled directly into bone to establish an IV line. They were thick, sharp, and brutally effective. She took 3. Her plan formed, not in words, but in a series of clear geometric images in her mind. A map of the hospital, overlaid with enemy positions, potential routes, and points of conflict. She was no longer a nurse in a hospital. She was an operator on a battlefield of her own choosing. She slipped out of the closet and moved in the opposite direction of the attackers, a shadow hugging the wall. Her soft-soled nursing clogs made no sound. The panicked screams and the rhythmic thud of combat boots covered any noise she might have made. She moved past the chapel, past the physical therapy room. She was heading for the circuit breaker panel that controlled the emergency lighting in the surgical wing. Darkness was a weapon, and she knew how to wield it better than they did. She found the panel in a small utility closet. With a flick of 3 switches, the entire surgical wing, including the main operating theater where she suspected the HVP was being held, was plunged back into total, disorienting blackness, the kind of blackness that swallowed sound and bred fear. For the attackers, relying on weapon-mounted lights, it would create tunnels of vision, leaving them blind to anything in the periphery. For her, who knew this space by touch, it was home. She waited, listening. She heard shouted curses in a language that was not Pashto or Dari. It was Russian, mercenaries, highly trained, highly paid. This changed the calculus. They wouldn't be easily frightened. They would adapt. She moved into the darkened corridor, one of the IO needles held in her fist like a dagger. The air was cold on her skin. The only light was the distant flashing strobes of the base alarm system, painting the walls in silent, frantic bursts of red. She was a hunter again. The thought came unbidden, and it didn't scare her. It felt like coming home. In the administrative wing, General Marcus Thorne had kicked the desk over and was using it as cover. The mahogany slab, imported at great expense for Dr. Finch's comfort, was now stopping 7.62 millimeters rounds. Thorne, his 2 aides, and the HVP's 4-man security detail were pinned down in the office, exchanging sporadic, disciplined fire with a squad of mercenaries in the outer hallway. Thorne was a man carved from granite and experience. At 60, he still moved with the coiled energy of a man half his age. He peered over the top of the desk, his expression one of furious concentration. His pistol was steady in his hand. "Sir, they've breached the west entrance. QRF is mobilizing, but they're meeting heavy resistance at the gate," his captain reported, reloading his M4 with swift, practiced movements. "They knew our response protocols." "Of course they did," Thorne growled. This was an inside job. Someone had given them blueprints, schedules, security blind spots. "They're not trying to kill us. They're trying to fix us in place while their primary team secures the asset." The HVP, a gaunt man with fever-bright eyes, was huddled behind a filing cabinet, guarded by 2 of his security team. He had been brought in with a complicated shrapnel wound and was supposed to have been undergoing surgery with Dr. Finch when the attack began. A burst of automatic fire stitched across the top of the desk, sending splinters of wood flying. Thorne ducked back down, his mind racing. They were trapped. The QRF was too far out. The attackers in the hospital were moving toward their objective with impunity. It was a perfectly executed plan. And then, through a lull in the gunfire, he saw it. Down the long, darkened corridor that led to the surgical wing, a scene of impossible violence was playing out in near silence. One of the mercenaries, who had been guarding the intersection, suddenly stiffened. He dropped his rifle and clawed at his neck, a look of shocked surprise on his face. He made a gurgling sound and collapsed. Behind him, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of a doorway. It was small, fast, and utterly silent. Before the second mercenary could even turn, the shadow was on him. There was a flash of movement, a wet, tearing sound, and the second man went down, his legs kicking for a moment before falling still. The shadow paused, a fleeting silhouette against the distant emergency lights. It was wearing hospital scrubs. Thorne's eyes, trained by decades of observation, picked out the details. The figure was retrieving a weapon from the first fallen man, checking the magazine, and chambering a round with a practiced, efficient flick of the wrist. The movements were not those of a soldier. They were too fluid, too precise. They were the movements of an apex predator. "Hold your fire," Thorne commanded his men, his voice a low whisper. "Hold your fire on the surgical corridor." He watched, mesmerized, as the figure in scrubs began to move again. It wasn't just clearing the hallway, it was hunting. It used the darkness, the alcoves, the doorways. It flowed from one patch of shadow to the next, a ghost in its own machine. A new sound reached them, a rhythmic metallic clatter from further down the hall. Another mercenary, drawn by the silence of his comrades, began to advance cautiously. The figure in scrubs pressed back into a doorway, melting into the black. As the mercenary passed, the figure emerged. There was no gunshot, just a swift, brutal takedown. The merc's helmeted head was slammed against the concrete wall with a sickening crack, and he crumpled to the floor. Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air. He had seen that kind of CQC before, in training sessions at Fort Bragg, in after-action reports from black sites whose names did not officially exist. It was the brutal, lethally efficient system taught to only one unit. His mind churned. A hospital staff member, moving like a Tier 1 operator. He mentally scanned the personnel files he had reviewed before his visit. Doctors, surgeons, physician assistants, nurses. He remembered one file that had been heavily redacted. A nurse recently transferred from Landstuhl, Anya Sharma, former Army Captain Medical Corps, honorable discharge. The file was clean, too clean. It was the kind of file they built for someone who had been sheep-dipped, given a new, clean identity after leaving the clandestine world. Then he remembered something else, a briefing years ago about a ghost operative in Syria, an operator known for their skill in infiltration and silent takedowns who had worked primarily alone, a call sign that was spoken only in whispers in secure rooms. Nightingale. It couldn't be. Just then, a wounded soldier, caught in the crossfire near Thorne's position, cried out. He was exposed, bleeding from a deep gash in his leg. Before any of Thorne's men could react, the figure in scrubs was moving again. It sprinted across the open, fire-swept space in a low crouch, a blur of motion. It reached the soldier, dragging him back into the relative safety of an alcove. Thorne raised his binoculars. He watched as the nurse, it had to be a nurse, went to work on the soldier. Her hands were a flurry of motion. She ripped open a field dressing with her teeth. She applied pressure. Then, seeing the arterial spray, she reached for the soldier's thigh. She didn't use a standard-issue cat tourniquet. She used a cravat from a first aid kit and a fallen piece of rebar, twisting it tight with a specific knot and a half-hitch lock that was not in any standard Army manual. It was a field-expedient technique, a modification developed and taught only within the confines of the Joint Special Operations Command's advanced medical courses. It was informally known as the Delta Cinch. Thorne lowered his binoculars, his knuckles white. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. It was her. He grabbed the radio from his captain. He switched it to a discreet encrypted channel he knew was monitored by every JSOC asset in country, a channel that was supposed to be used only in the direst of emergencies. He brought the handset to his lips. His men looked at him, confused. "This is Warhammer," he said, his voice a low, urgent rasp. He used his old call sign, one that hadn't been on the air in a decade. "To the nightingale in the house. I see you. The house is yours. Clean it." For a long moment there was only static. Then a voice came back, calm and clear, impossibly steady amid the chaos. It was a woman's voice. "Warhammer, this is Nightingale. Copy that. Going to work." Anya felt the general's words land like a physical blow. Warhammer, Nightingale, names from a buried life, a ghost limb that suddenly ached with memory. For a fraction of a second, the past and present collided. She was no longer just a nurse defending her patients. She was an operator with a mission, sanctioned by the highest authority. The recognition, the trust in his voice, settled the last of the conflict within her. The two halves of her life, the healer and the warrior, fused into one. "Copy that," she sent, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside. "Going to work." She finished securing the tourniquet on the wounded soldier, murmuring a reassuring word to him before pressing his own hand down on the wound. "Keep pressure here. You'll be fine." She took the carbine from the third mercenary she had neutralized. A beautiful piece of hardware, an AK-105, customized and suppressed. It felt perfectly balanced in her hands, as familiar as a scalpel. She checked the magazine. Nearly full. She slung it over her shoulder. Her primary weapon would remain silence and surprise. The rifle was for emergencies. Her objective was clear. The HVP was in the main OR. The bulk of the mercenary team would be there, trying to extract him. The team pinning down the general was a secondary force, a holding action. She had to cut the head off the snake. She moved back into the darkness she now commanded. She knew this building better than they did. She knew its secret paths, its hidden corners. She knew the squeaky floorboard outside the linen closet, the ventilation duct that ran over the top of the ICU, the service hatch in the morgue. This wasn't just a hospital, it was her hunting ground. In the main operating theater, Dr. Finch was sweating, not from the heat, but from pure, abject terror. The mercenaries had stormed in minutes ago, their movements swift and professional. They had their own medic who was now working to stabilize the HVP on the operating table, preparing him for transport. The leader, a massive man with a scarred face and dead eyes, was orchestrating the chaos. "Get him off the ventilator! We need to move, now!" the scarred man barked in Russian. Finch, who had been cowering near a bank of monitors, held up his hands. "You can't! He's not stable! Moving him will kill him!" The mercenary leader turned his cold gaze on Finch. He switched to heavily accented but clear English. "He is more useful to my employers alive, doctor, but he is still useful dead. You, however, are useful to no one if you continue to be a problem." He gestured with his rifle. "You were supposed to have this handled. You were supposed to report his death on the table an hour ago. The general's arrival complicated your simple task." Finch's face went pale. I couldn't. The general was watching everything. His personal physician was observing. I had no opportunity." "You were paid a great deal of money for an opportunity," the mercenary said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "My men are dying in the hallways because of your incompetence. You disabled the cameras as we agreed, but you were supposed to ensure a clear path." "It's not my fault," Finch whined, his arrogance completely stripped away, leaving only a pathetic, grasping fear. "There's someone out there. One of the staff. They're killing your men." The mercenary leader laughed, a short, harsh bark. "A doctor? A nurse? Do not insult my intelligence. It is the general's security detail." "No, it's one person. I heard on the radio." Finch started to babble, but his words were cut off as the main door to the operating theater slid open with a soft hiss. A single, empty gurney rolled into the room, pushed from the darkened hallway beyond. It glided silently across the floor and bumped gently against a supply cart. It was a question, a challenge. The mercenaries tensed, rifles snapping up to cover the doorway. The leader motioned two of his men forward. "Check it." The two men advanced cautiously, flanking the door. They peered into the pitch-black corridor. Nothing. One of them flicked on his weapon light, its powerful beam cutting a sharp cone through the darkness. It illuminated nothing but an empty hallway. As the beam swept past a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, something small and metallic fell from the top of it, landing on the linoleum floor with a faint clatter. It was a scalpel. The mercenary swung his light back to the extinguisher, and that's when the ceiling panel directly above him exploded downwards. Anya dropped from the crawl space like a spider, landing silently behind him. Before he could even register her presence, she drove the hard plastic stock of her captured rifle into the back of his knee, buckling his leg. As he fell, she brought the barrel up under his chin, the movement a blur. She didn't fire. She used the weapon as a lever, snapping his head back with a sickening crunch of vertebrae. He was dead before his body hit the floor. The second mercenary spun around, his rifle coming up. He was fast. Anya was faster. She dropped, sweeping his legs out from under him. As he crashed to the ground, she was on him, her knee pinning his rifle, one hand clamping over his mouth and nose, the other driving the sharp point of an IO needle into the soft tissue beneath his jaw, straight up into his brainstem. It was a silent, horrific death. A technique not found in any book. 2 men down in less than 3 seconds, without a single shot fired. The remaining 3 mercenaries in the room stared in disbelief. The leader recovered first, opening fire into the doorway. The bullets sparked off the metal doorframe and chewed into the concrete wall opposite. But Anya was already gone, having melted back into the shadows of the hallway. "She's in the walls!" one of the men yelled, his voice tight with panic. Anya's voice, disembodied and calm, echoed from the darkness. "Your ride isn't coming. The QRF has retaken the gate." It was a lie. She had no idea about the QRF's status, but fear was a weapon, and she would use every tool at her disposal. "You have wounded. You're losing men. This is a failed operation. Put your weapons down. I'm a nurse. I will treat your wounded." The offer of mercy was also a weapon. It created doubt, hesitation. "Find her!" the leader roared, his face a mask of fury. He was not a man who negotiated. He shoved Dr. Finch toward the door. You, go out there. Tell her you are a non-combatant, a doctor. No, please, Finch begged, clawing at the man's arm. She'll kill me. The mercenary leader smiled coldly and pressed the muzzle of his rifle into Finch's back. She might. I will. Go. Sobbing, Finch stumbled out into the darkened hallway, his hands raised. Don't shoot. I'm a doctor. I'm unarmed. Anya watched him from a small observation room 20 feet away, the one-way glass rendering her invisible. She saw the mercenary leader use Finch as a shield, a human minesweeper, while he and his remaining man moved to follow. It was a classic cowardly tactic. She had to end it, now. She slipped out of the observation room and back into the main corridor, but further down, behind their position. She opened the valve on a large oxygen tank mounted to the wall, the gas hissing into the enclosed space. Then she took a single hand sanitizer packet from her pocket, the kind with high alcohol content. She tore it open. Last chance, her voice echoed from a different direction now, drawing their attention. The leader swung his rifle toward the sound, momentarily moving away from Finch. It was the opening she needed. She tossed a heavy metal bedpan down the opposite end of the hall. It clattered loudly, a perfect diversion. As the two remaining mercenaries instinctively turned toward the noise, Anya moved. She sprinted from the shadows, covering the 30 feet to Finch in seconds. She didn't slow down. She slammed into him, driving him to the floor and out of the line of fire. In the same motion, she pulled a disposable lighter from the pocket of the dead mercenary she had looted. She flicked it on and tossed it toward the hissing oxygen tank. The hallway erupted in a blinding flash and a deafening roar. The oxygen-rich air ignited, creating a massive, fast-moving fireball. It wasn't a high-explosive blast, but a wave of pure thermal energy. The two mercenaries, caught in the open, were engulfed. Their screams were cut short as their tactical gear and ammunition cooked off. The concussion wave threw Anya and Finch against the far wall. The air was filled with the acrid smell of burnt plastic and something horribly organic. The emergency sprinklers kicked in, showering the hallway in a downpour of grimy water. Anya rose to her feet, her ears ringing. The automatic rifle was still slung on her back. In her hand, she held a single scalpel she had palmed from a tray. She was drenched, bruised, but alive. The door to the operating theater was blown off its hinges. The mercenary medic lay dead, killed by the blast. The leader, however, was still alive. He had been shielded by the doorway. He was badly burned, his gear smoking. But he was on his feet, his rifle raised. He saw Anya. He saw the scalpel in her hand and laughed, a ragged, painful sound. A nurse, he rasped, blood bubbling on his lips. They sent a nurse to kill me. He leveled his rifle. Anya didn't wait. She moved. She didn't think. She threw the scalpel. It was a desperate, impossible move. But her throw was perfect. The small, weighted handle flew true. The blade, a sliver of surgical steel, caught the man in the throat, sinking to the hilt in the soft spot just above his clavicle. It severed his carotid artery and trachea in one clean cut. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a final terminal surprise. He tried to raise his rifle, but his hands wouldn't obey. He made a choking, wet sound and collapsed, the rifle clattering to the floor beside him. Silence descended, broken only by the hiss of the sprinklers and the frantic, pathetic sobbing of Dr. Finch. The hospital was quiet. The battle was over. Just as Anya took a deep, shuddering breath, the hallway was flooded with light. A dozen soldiers from the QRF, clad in full battle gear, stormed in, their weapons up. At their head was General Thorne. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. The dead mercenaries, the scorched hallway, the whimpering form of Dr. Finch. And Anya, standing in the center of it all, a lone, drenched figure, looking more like a vengeful spirit than a nurse. Thorne's men fanned out, securing the area. The general walked forward, his boots splashing in the ankle-deep water. He ignored everyone else. His eyes were only on Anya. "Nightingale," he said, his voice low and filled with a profound respect. "Report." "Hostiles neutralized. HVP is secure, needs medical attention," Anya said, her voice hoarse. "The asset is stable for now." Finch, seeing the general, saw his chance. He scrambled to his feet, pointing a shaking finger at Anya. "General, that woman, she's insane. She tried to kill us all. She blew up the hallway. Arrest her." Thorne didn't even look at him. He kept his gaze locked on Anya. "Is that true? Did you cause this explosion?" "Yes, sir," Anya said simply. "It was a tactical necessity." "She's a madwoman," Finch shrieked. "She has to be court-martialed. I am the chief medical officer of this facility, and I demand—" "Dr. Finch," General Thorne said, his voice suddenly dropping to a temperature just above absolute zero. He turned his head slowly, and for the first time, fixed the surgeon with a glare so cold it seemed to suck the heat from the air. "Shut up." Finch's mouth snapped shut with an audible click. "I had a listening device in this wing," Thorne continued, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I heard your conversation with the mercenary leader. I heard you admit to disabling security. I heard you complain that my arrival had complicated your plan to sell out an allied asset and betray every soldier on this base." The color drained from Finch's face. He looked like a man who had just watched his own grave being dug. He started to stammer, to bluster, but the words wouldn't come. "You have betrayed your oath as a doctor, your commission as an officer, and your duty as a man," Thorne said, his voice rising with each charge. He gestured to two of his soldiers. "Sergeant, place this piece of garbage under arrest. He is to be afforded none of the privileges of his rank. He is a common traitor." The soldiers hauled Finch to his feet, cinching his hands behind his back with zip ties. The arrogance was gone. The power was gone. All that was left was a terrified, sweating man in expensive scrubs, his career and his life utterly destroyed in the space of 5 minutes. As they dragged him away, his eyes met Anya's. She saw no triumph in his defeat. She saw nothing at all. He was just another problem that had been solved. With Finch gone, the hallway seemed to breathe again. Thorne turned back to Anya. The medics were now swarming the area, tending to the HVP and the wounded soldiers she had saved. The chaos was becoming organized again. The general gently took the captured rifle from her shoulder. He looked at her, at the exhaustion that was finally settling into the lines around her eyes, at the small cut on her cheek she hadn't even noticed. "I read your file, Captain Sharma," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "The real one. I made a call to a friend at Langley. It took some doing." He paused. "I know why you left the unit. I read the after-action report from Kandahar. What happened to your team? It wasn't your fault." Anya flinched, the words hitting a nerve she thought was long dead. "With all due respect, General, you weren't there." "No, I wasn't," he conceded, his voice softening. "But I know a hero when I see one, and I know that the Army made a mistake letting you go. You tried to bury yourself in a quiet life, but a fire like yours doesn't just go out. It just waits for oxygen." He looked around the destroyed hallway at the testament to her lethal competence. "And it looks like you found some." She said nothing, just stood there, letting the water from the sprinklers drip from her hair onto her shoulders. She felt empty. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a hollow ache in its place. "I'm putting together a new unit," Thorne said, his voice shifting back to the clipped tones of command. "A small, deniable team, a ghost unit. Officially, it's a specialized medical extraction and rapid response team. Unofficially, it's a scalpel for problems the military can't solve with a hammer. It needs a commander, someone who knows both sides of the coin, how to save a life and how to take one. Someone who can move through the shadows and think 5 steps ahead of the enemy." He held her gaze. "It needs you, Anya. I need you." The offer hung in the air between them, a path back. Not to the life she had lost, but to a new one. A life where she didn't have to hide who she was. A life where her skills would be an asset, not a secret to be ashamed of. A life where she wouldn't be answering to men like Alistair Finch. She would be the one giving the orders. She looked past the general, at the medics working frantically but efficiently, at the soldiers standing guard, their faces a mixture of awe and respect as they glanced her way. They weren't looking at a rookie nurse anymore. They were looking at the woman who had single-handedly saved their hospital. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not joy, but a sense of rightness, of purpose. The ghost had a home again. She met General Thorne's eyes, and for the first time that day, a small, weary smile touched her lips. "When do I start?" The sun was rising over the mountains of Afghanistan, painting the dusty sky in shades of orange and pink. The last of the sprinklers had been shut off, and a weary quiet had settled over FOB Griffin. The bodies of the mercenaries had been removed, and the cleanup had begun. Life, brutal and relentless, was already moving on. Anya stood near the helicopter pad, a fresh set of dry scrubs on, a cup of coffee steaming in her hands. She watched the medevac helicopter carrying the now stable HVP lift off, its rotors beating a steady rhythm against the morning air. She was no longer a ghost. She was a commander. The thought was strange, daunting, but it fit. It felt right. The quiet, exhausted relief was a balm on her soul. She had faced down the demons of her past and the corruption of her present and had come out the other side, not unscathed, but whole, vindicated, empowered. The underestimated nurse was gone for good. In her place stood Major Sharma, commander of a unit that did not yet exist, ready for the next fight. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would be ready. Thank you for watching. Your support is the fuel that keeps this channel running. So if you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It truly means the world to us. Now, we have a question for you. Have you ever had a moment in your life where a hidden skill suddenly became critically important? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. And stick around, because the next story is queued up and ready to play for you right now.